Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Non-Traditional Nurse. Today's episode is going to be a little different. We're going to be diving into a topic that's showing up everywhere: artificial intelligence. So, you might love it, you might hate it, but it seems it's here to stay. So, let's dive into it. So, today we have Julia. Thanks for joining us, Julia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Thanks. And Julia's a nurse who's getting her master's degree with a thesis focused on large language models. So today we're going to break it down in plain language and talk about how nurses can really use AI to make their lives easier. So we're going to cover, what AI is, how it could fit into your day-to-day life, some of its limitations, ethical considerations, and hopefully dig into how it might help you in your next career move. So, let's get to it. So, Julia, can you walk us through your career in nursing and how you got into the world of nursing informatics and AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to start, my journey into nursing was a little abnormal in and of itself, I would say. So, I had no idea that I wanted to actually be a nurse. I was not really interested in healthcare in high school, to be completely honest. So, I actually went to school. I did a Bachelor of Applied Science in Human Nutrition. I was like on my way, on my path to become a registered dietitian. Um, and then when I actually entered the workforce as a dietetic intern, it was kind of part of the schooling. I saw what the nurses were doing. I was really intrigued and like how much they really affected patient care at like all levels. So I really wanted to maybe pursue nursing. So I actually had all of the prerequisites from my degree to do a condensed RN program. So I did that during the COVID pandemic, which was exciting and challenging and scary, obviously, being
Yes.
like my first, experience in nursing was through a pandemic.
Right.
But I don't regret it at all, honestly. Like, I think we were forced to learn everything so quickly under really interesting conditions. And it honestly opened up kind of like a world of opportunities. So, my journey to informatics was also maybe a little bit abnormal as well. I never had a class in informatics. I didn't know what informatics was when I graduated nursing school. In the Canadian healthcare landscape, we didn't really use a lot of technology. I always joke, like, now I'm in the world of nursing informatics, but my final placement in nursing school, we still had paper charting, and that was only a
Yeah.
few years ago. So
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So it's rapidly evolving, obviously. It's changing like every single day. So that's exciting. But I will say, when I was in kind of my final placement, I really kind of, I guess, realized and kind of sparked my own interest. Asking myself questions like, okay, where are all the like health, like informatics or, technology supports for patients? Where are they for nurses? Like, I was working at one of like the number one Canadian hospitals in like this huge epicenter in Toronto. And I was like, what is going on? Like, why are we having paper everywhere? Like, this is so
Yeah.
strange to me, right? So, um, basically, it was very much ingrained in my brain, I think, all throughout my nursing school that, you have to work in clinical nursing, you have to have a bedside job. Don't even think about doing anything, non traditional until you have like 2 solid years full time work experience. So, came out of school, like, I felt unprepared, I was scared, I didn't know what to do. So, I actually went right into the operating room from nursing school and never had a placement there.
Yeah.
So it was very daunting. It was an amazing experience, but unfortunately, it just was not the right fit for me. Um, and I was scared because I was told this whole time, like, you don't have any other options. But that was really untrue for me. So I hope other nurses, maybe listening at the beginning of their career, um, don't think that. So I actually left that job and I started working as a sedation and recovery room nurse in a oral surgery clinic. So that kind of opened up some new opportunities. And then at the same time, I started working for a startup technology company called Smartin. And then I'm actually still with them. So I've kind of grown as the company has grown and as the world of nursing and AI has grown. So yeah, we kind of specialize in AI solutions for nurses. And at that point, I really understood what informatics was, obviously. And then after working there for a year, I now I'm going into my second year of my master's at Western here in Ontario, Canada. So right now I'm kind of studying, I'm starting my study, I guess. So it's really looking at how nurses interact and use large language models, which is a form of artificial intelligence, and really how they classify critical and sensitive information from those models in their clinical practice.
Very cool. And thanks for sharing that because I think it's just so important. I think there's always these like blanket statements told to nurses of you can't do this, you can't work when you're in school, you have to get this much experience. And it does such a disservice because it's just not the same for everyone. There are tons of non-traditional roles that do build on great clinical experience, but there are other options. So you don't have to feel like totally stuck just because a nursing professor told you this is the way it is. Nursing is evolving so fast and like so are the opportunities. And that's one thing I love about it.
Absolutely, me too. It's like really exciting. And I think that was
Yeah.
like half the reason I switched from, a profession that didn't have a lot of opportunities. There's only a few registered dietitians at every hospital, right?
Right.
Compared to nursing. So it was really exciting. And like I'm still excited about it. And I feel like starting out my career in informatics, but it's been 3 years so far. So
Yeah, and there's so many places you can take that. And congrats to you. You just this week had a paper published on large language models like in nursing education. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Thank you so much. Yeah, so that was really exciting. And it's basically an original paper. So it's called a concept analysis. It's a very academic thing. It was actually a school paper, and my professor and my supervisor really encouraged our small class of like 12 to write your paper like you were going to publish it. And then some of us did. And then some of us, were like, I'm never opening that document again. um, we're not going there. But
Sure.
I thought, if I really want to excel my career as an academic, it's a really good idea to start publishing. And as painful and exciting of a process as it was, it's finally here. So it was published last Friday. And, I think it's a really interesting read. I think a lot of the things that we read, whether it's, an academic paper, a peer reviewed paper, or if it's just an article, it's really, maybe a little bit scary about AI. But hopefully, this paper, opens your eyes in terms of more opportunities and more optimism, I guess. So really framing large language models in terms of, how they can help in nursing education and what they're actually being used for and some of the results. And they're really positive so far. Not to say there isn't any negative, potential impacts. We definitely cover that as well. But yeah, trying to talk about them in a more positive light for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's going to be limitations to any new technologies. So obviously, you're going to look at that. But to be so scared of something that is obviously going to be the way of the future,
Yeah.
we're seeing that every day, is so important. So we can bring it back to like just the
Mhm.
very basics. What is AI, like, kind of in your own words?
Yeah. So I honestly think of AI as like a tool that can recognize patterns in data. It can generate really useful outputs. For example, text output, or maybe even make a prediction or recommend something. So I often refer to it as like a super fast assistant. So I use it as my assistant, right? I'd never use it as a final decision maker, but I let it maybe start the brainstorming process and I go back and forth with it. Um, and there's honestly so many different types of AI that AI is almost like too general of a term, I find.
Sure.
So nowadays, like, I think it would really be helpful for nurses to start learning the different types of AI, what the distinctions are, what the similarities are, and how each one can maybe benefit their practice or their education. And so, my research is obviously in the area of large language models, and that's kind of where my work has gone so far. But other forms of AI, virtual reality exists, and that's really, making waves in terms of like mental health nursing. Augmented reality, which is really helping the education piece, actually training different healthcare practitioners throughout the stages of their degree to actually help them interact maybe with a simulated patient environment. Robotics, which is fun and scary at the same time,
Yeah.
and predictive analytics, which I think is, maybe the first thing that a lot of us in healthcare really heard of, in terms of, alerting healthcare providers to maybe sepsis or a different disease condition. It's really taking data from different sources, vital signs, lab values, and actually notifying healthcare providers, something's up, we need to do something about this.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's been there longer than anyone's realized. We've been getting sepsis alerts in Epic or whatever EHR for a while, but you never thought like, oh my gosh, this is AI, and now it's just so much more front and center. We see what these predictions like where they're coming from. So yeah, it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think? I feel like a lot of nurses that I've talked to might feel just like unsure, intimidated about even like starting to use AI. Like some of them have never even dipped their toe in the water.
No, I don't blame them. And honestly, I think it's like this fear of the unknown. So AI, at least from conversations I've had with my colleagues, nursing professors that are also studying something similar, AI feels very like abstract. It's like tech heavy. It's very complicated, and I also feel like there's this huge amount of pressure on which tools nurses are using that actually have those AI elements to them, more so than our colleagues, such as maybe like physicians, for example. So, we may feel more heavily scrutinized when we do use AI in our practice. And I think this maybe stems from nursing being thought of as, a very caring profession rather than a very technical profession. So when nurses use advanced tools like AI in their practice, it really challenges those traditional expectations. Um, so nurses are also individually responsible and accountable for their actions under self-regulation, as we're well aware of.
Mhm.
So, if a nurse does decide to use an AI tool in their practice or maybe their teaching strategies, and something goes wrong, it's the nurse, obviously, not the AI tool that bears that responsibility. And historically, I think in medicine, medicine's had way more of an influence over tech adoption and policy decisions. So when doctors, for example, use AI, people often see it as innovation. And then when nurses use AI, they might be questioned more, because nurses are not traditionally viewed as the ones leading this new technology adoption. But obviously, we're challenging that. So I think that's maybe where it stems from. I think there's a lot of theories in, that question itself, but that's just my personal opinion and take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's valuable. And that's such an interesting way of putting it. I've never thought about it, as yeah, nurses are kind of taken along for the ride sometimes when these big changes happen versus being the ones, instigating the changes.
Mm.
So, what types of uses can you see nurses benefiting using AI in their day to day work or life, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I think it's actually being used more often than we know about it. So, maybe before we even, you learn about the EHR at your workplace, you do all these modules, but a lot of the AI is behind the scenes. It's not at the forefront, it's not front and center. So, I think in the day to day, if you're anything like me, and when you're starting out as a new grad nurse, you're asking a lot of questions, you're unsure about a lot of things. In a perfect world, you would obviously ask your preceptor or another nurse on the unit, and they'd give you the answer right away. They'd know exactly what you're talking about. But that's not always the case, especially during a hectic shift. And depending on the type of nurse you are, you might not be super eager to approach, some other nurses, maybe more experienced nurses. So before I recommend what to use AI for, I think it's
Mhm.
really important to caution that prior use to using any new tool, like you also mentioned, really learn about it, ask questions about it, see what nursing researchers are saying about it, just read up on it quickly. But in terms of large language models, and that's a big term in and of itself. So when I say that, I'm referring to things like ChatGPT, which I think a lot of us have heard of, if not already started to use. They're really creating a lot of new language models, or they're improving the existing ones, honestly, on a daily basis. So really try and have a good understanding of how they work before you start blindly trusting them and using them every single day. And a quick reminder, they're called language models for a reason. They're trained to provide you with a text response. So if you do give it nonsense to work with, it will respond to you because that's what it's trained to do. That's doing its job, right? They're never going to be 100% correct, no matter what we do over time, no matter how far AI comes in terms of innovation. So use them very carefully and sparingly, I would say. But day to day, I think these are really helpful tools to start your brainstorming process. So like I said earlier, don't let them be your final decision maker. Of course, that's you, but it's really important to have this solid foundation in a particular area before engaging with these tools. Or it's really next to impossible to actually critically appraise the output that it's providing you if you don't know anything about a particular concept.
Sure.
Yeah, so I really encourage nurses to utilize large language models like ChatGPT or whatever else is out there that you really like to use, you become familiar with it, to answer questions for educational purposes. So there's a fine line, I think, of using it and then acting on the information it gives you and using it as one support tool in a toolbox amongst many other tools that you should be using to kind of augment your decision-making process. So general questions like explain the pathophysiology of COPD to me, I think is a very good example to use these tools for. Or providing education in layperson's terms. So sometimes we can get caught up in medical jargon, especially when our friends are nurses, maybe our family members are nurses. We're always in that world of medicine. So using these tools to help you simplify really complex procedures can be really helpful to learn how to do, or even empower your patients to do that for themselves as well. And then brainstorming some teaching strategies. So I talk to a lot of nursing preceptors that are asking me like, how can I use these tools to help me in my teaching with students, whether it's in clinical placement or in a lecture format. So if you have a really hard time getting a concept through to maybe a group of nursing students, I think an LLM can be a really nice strategy to use to bounce ideas off of and see what's out there in terms of unique teaching strategies. And then lastly, I think something you're probably very familiar with too is supporting professional development. So resume
Yes.
building, cover letter, preparing for interviews. And I really highly encourage a lot of nurses to do this. I'll often ask a large language model, can you be the nurse manager that's hiring me for a certain role, and let's start the interview process just to get practice, because talking, a lot of these interviews now are on a virtual platform similar to this, and people get caught up on their words, they get really stressed out. There's no need for that. If just practice, 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 so it can really be used as a tool for that as well, which is great.
Absolutely. I have done that for multiple interviews. And I love the fact that you can dictate to it, or there's even
Mhm.
versions where you can talk directly to it and it can talk back to you, because you can answer the interview questions and then ask it for feedback or what you could improve about that. And sometimes it can help you be more concise, or, say, I'm not sure you really got your message across. So I have found that to be such a useful tool. And then I think the patient education is great. And I've never even thought about it. And I'll probably do that tonight because, when you're explaining these complex diseases, some patients can understand it here, some patients understand it here. There's just so many levels. So I think having more of those in your toolbox of how to explain it well is just such a great use for it.
Absolutely.
Can you share a few examples of how you personally use AI tools in your work or day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I honestly, my number one is a large language model, since that's kind of what I'm most familiar with, most comfortable with. So I use it as like a conversational agent, honestly, which is what they are, what they're supposed to be used for. So really starting that brainstorming process with it. And I find this can be really helpful no matter where you are. If you feel stuck about where to start on something, it's really nice to just bounce ideas off of. If you don't have anyone else to do that with. So, if your supervisor is busy, you're in a master's program, or you have a silly question, or you think it's a silly question, or no one's answering you quickly enough, like just start to use it and see what it provides you. It might help you think of things that you didn't think of earlier. And I wish I could say I used it to summarize articles, since I'm in the research area, and that would be awesome. I've tried to get it to do that, but it tends to get confused when it's analyzing like certain pieces of literature. So as the technology improves, continue to try to do things, but also remember to critically appraise every step of the way.
Sure.
And do it with caution for sure. So I find if you are going to get it to help you summarize, maybe it's a procedural document or something with your institution, be very specific about the section. Don't just give it a 40-page document. Say, can you summarize this? It
Sure.
might not do the best job, right?
Hmm.
And then, this might not be a common one. And I like to compare the large language models that are coming out onto the market. So the freely accessible ones. Probably not a normal thing to do, but since I work in this area, I'm really passionate, honestly, about like
Absolutely.
comparing them, seeing what their capabilities are, which ones stand out for certain things and use cases. Um, and honestly, like which ones perform better against each other when you're prompting it in a certain way. So I find certain models are better for like quick, a quick snapshot answer to something when you're in a rush. And then other models are really good at providing like a lot of detail. So maybe you're trying to study for something, you're trying to really understand a concept, or maybe like a new procedure that they're doing on your unit. Or that you learned in school that you just have no idea about. Maybe your textbook is only giving you like a small paragraph. So it can be useful for that. And then apart from nursing, I also kind of like using them for other kind of fun things. So I can share with you, I'm getting married soon, so I shared like a photo of
Congrats.
my thank you, of my mom's wedding dress, and I said, can you help me modernize this and make it into something that I could wear for my ceremony? And I actually gave like a rough sketch, and I gave it to the seamstress, and we actually worked with it. So really fun things like that, or even
How
like you can take,
cool.
yeah, isn't that cool? And
Yeah.
like we're people too, nurses, we can use it for like more than just, clinical practice, education, research, like use it for fun and see what it comes up with. And I think that will maybe, slowly start to build your trust with it too and understand its capabilities, where it falls short or where it really does do well. And, or another example is like I gave it a photo and I said, can you make this a watercolor photo, which is really fun to do for little gift ideas or like make cards and
Yes.
stuff. So yeah, those are just my use cases, but I know there's so many more out there.
Absolutely. And I love treating it like my personal assistant, like you said. Like if you told me 10 years ago I could have my own personal assistant
Yeah.
for $20 a month or whatever you have to pay
Yeah.
for a subscription. So I've had it come up with funny names for my book club, come up with like
Yes.
my grocery list from 3 recipes I put in, come up with a workout plan for me. So, yeah,
Hmm.
there are so many things. And I find that, it's learning me over time and it's understanding what I'm looking for. So I get to the point a lot faster. But you do have to be specific and help it through the process for sure.
Yes.
And then I think big question, especially when we talk about using it in nursing, is you've talked about some, but what are the limitations? Are there types of questions we should not ask AI, or it's really not appropriate to rely on it?
Absolutely. So I think it's just as important to kind of understand the limitations as the benefits, obviously. So just having like a general understanding that AI doesn't know, it predicts based on certain patterns. So errors, or a lot, I'm sure we've all heard the term hallucinations, can happen throughout your, process of using it. So they also lack this nuance in clinical decision making. So in an LLM world, everything is possible. So a lot of the research shows that it will oversuggest clinical treatments that really aren't feasible, or, I've never heard of that. What is that? And then I look it up and it's done in this one hospital in the middle of Europe, right? So
Yeah.
be very careful in terms of that, and just understanding those limitations and, not using it and running with it is important. And also just knowing, I think this is a really common misconception. It's not up to date in real time. So unless it's connected to an external source, which, maybe some of them are if they're being integrated into your EHR in the hospital, but the openly accessible ones that we're using for our day-to-day lives are not. They're, using data from a preset date. So it is not continuously updating all the time. So that's something to be aware of. And then like I said, unless the AI or the LLM specifically is interconnected to your EHR and your institution specifically states that it's okay, they really shouldn't be used for patient-specific diagnoses or medication dosing without verification. So throughout my work and my research, I've been finding, they're improving, which is great. But in the early days, if I asked it, what is the medication dosage of medication X, it would provide, one of them was actually 3 times the regular dose of that medication,
Yikes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, again, using it education purposes, research purposes, I was not acting on this information, but I can only imagine what would happen if a nurse did decide to act on that, right? And then, of course, I think we can all agree, it's not the best for really sensitive, emotional scenarios that require that human element, human judgment, and empathy. So, I've seen some courses really trying to use it, virtual simulation or patient interactions, which I think is a good starting point. But, that doesn't mean we need to replace nursing education with a large language model. Let's use it, and then let's also prepare our nurses in practicum or in person, and you're pretending to be the patient. So yeah, there's a lot more, I think, where that came from, but those are just kind of the big chunks of, I guess, the limitations, especially of large language models. There's, I think, a different subset of limitations for each type of AI.
Sure.
But those could be, a whole podcast in and of
Yeah.
itself.
Yes.
There's so much out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, why we will always need nurses is that human touch and that empathy is like so important in our profession.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a similar vein to that, when we're talking about ethics, privacy, compliance, what should we keep in mind when we're talking about those in healthcare?
Absolutely. So this is a huge one, obviously, and I think any research paper that you're reading is going to mention this in some aspect, or it probably won't get published, to be honest.
Yeah.
You've got to mention it, right? So the biggest thing for me, and this will sound silly, even having to mention, but I do think it's a really important reminder for all of us is like, do not copy and paste identifiable patient information into a large language model. And fortunately, it happens. And I think it's just a lack of education, what's allowed. But this is where, you really got to be mindful of like your HIPAA or local privacy laws. And, that's everyone's favorite course in nursing school. It's really exciting, but we really do need to, protect your license. And it's up to you as the nurse. You'll learn it in nursing school, but if you're practicing maybe in different states or different provinces, those will change based on where you are at. So, and also across institutions. So I think when a lot of these AI solutions started to come out, for example, like even the New York Department of Education banned the use of ChatGPT, and then they quickly realized that they can't actually ban it, but they tried, right? Because they're just so scared of it and they don't know what's going to happen. And they don't know how students are going to use it and all the ethical and privacy concerns that come from that. But just really make sure, like before you press enter and before you even think about using it, like what are your intentions with it? Just be very mindful at every step of the way. And then I do think, we always talk about digital literacy, right? And I think nurses really, this is like a core competency that we really need to maybe be better at really teaching nurses. And right as soon as we start training them, really how to evaluate if those outputs are safe and ethical. A lot more institutions, I think, now are implementing courses to address this, but this is kind of, I wouldn't say too late. It's never too late, but I really think we need to start like the undergrad level, not when a nurse lands their first job in the hospital. We don't want to start teaching
Right.
them at that point. Um, but you know what? You can't blame them because they're, a lot of institutions are struggling to keep up with the pace of AI and the AI tool development. There's new things being, launched on the market every single day. So creating like a blind procedural guide is not going to be super helpful. But, if your hospital is endorsing something to use in your practice, definitely advocate for like, okay, what are my safeguards? How should I use this? What shouldn't I use this for? And then something like a huge, huge thing is I think maybe, some of us in the AI informatics world have heard a lot about is, biased data will lead to biased predictions, right? So
Yeah.
I was at a digital health Canada webinar, and these researchers from CAMH, which is like Canada's biggest mental health hospital, um, they stated that ethnographic studies show that even with clinicians entering data and overseeing the outputs, human bias really still does shape the AI outcomes. So we can say it as much as we want, but it really starts with like what the nurse is entering into that EHR. That is the data that they're using to create the large language models, especially the ones that are specific for, healthcare professionals. So there's a lot more, I think, ethical privacy concerns, but I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that was such a good overall message. It's like I think it is good like we talked about nurses are a little bit skeptical to, vet something before they use it, which is so good because like you said, it's every day improving and policy cannot policy takes so much time it cannot keep up. So yeah, kind of making sure your personal guidelines also aware of your hospital guidelines and everything like that. But like you said, just using your brain before you enter
Mhm.
anything into it. And then you always have to be the person to decide if those, if that's worth using or not. You can never blindly follow it because I'll ask it to make a picture and there's 6 fingers on my person. So
Yeah.
nothing is perfect for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not the best artists in the world, that's for
Yeah, it's
sure.
got some work for sure.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about, today, what are some maybe specific prompts or tips on how to prompt if someone's just getting started with AI? What kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, so I have some little tips and tricks that actually I kind of adopted from the computer science world. So I found like a study from the computer science like literature, and specifically how engineers are utilizing large language models to really get the outputs that they're looking for. And I thought, well, why can't we do this for nurses, right? So I created something using the terms and what they're actually called, but then made it into nursing examples. So I'll just go over like 4 of them. There's a
Yeah.
few more too, but I think these are like really cool and applicable to nursing. So the first one's called the flipped interaction pattern. So this would look something like, for example, the prompt would say, from now on, I would like you to ask me questions to create a nursing care plan for a patient with congestive heart failure, for example, but any disease process, really. And then when you have enough information, create a care plan for me. So that's a really interesting one, especially if you're at like the nursing undergrad level or maybe graduate level and you're learning about a new disease process. And you might not know what types of questions to actually ask the large language model. So that one can come in handy. And then the persona patterns, this one's really cool. So, something like, from now on, act as the charge nurse or nurse manager who's an expert in the field of labor and delivery. Pay close attention to nursing interventions or of any query that I enter. Provide outputs that an expert nurse manager would regarding that nursing intervention. So that's really cool too, because until the large language model, if you have interacted with it previously, some of them will start to create like a profile. But if it's the first time you're using something, it doesn't know where you're at. So maybe even letting it know as well, like I'm a novice nurse, or, I've been nursing for 3 years. This is my expertise. This can help come in handy too, just so that it will provide interventions, solutions, recommendations that actually fall within your kind of scope. Um, and then the question refinement pattern is interesting. So this is something like, from now on, whenever I ask about a patient that has congestive heart failure, suggest a better version of the question to use that incorporates information specific to the disease process in the language or framework that I'm using instead, and ask me if I would like to use that question. So I love using that one because sometimes I'm not getting the output that I'm looking for and I get frustrated. I'm like, okay, I know it's capable of doing it, but what am I doing wrong?
Sure.
This one will really help because it will literally say, okay, are you maybe asking about this instead, but you don't know the words in your head because you're
Yeah.
foggy and you haven't slept all day? um, So that one comes in handy for me personally a lot. And then the fact checklist pattern. So this one's really cool. So, you would say something like, from now on, when you generate an answer, create a set of facts that the answer depends on that should be checked, and list this set of facts at the end of your output. Only include facts related to, what you're asking about, congestive heart failure, COPD, whatever it is. And that one's helpful because I think a lot of the time, like we said, don't blindly trust everything it's telling you. But sometimes you don't know where it might mess things up or where it might need a little bit more research behind it. So that one will actually give you something to work with and say, you know, it'll provide you with something, and then you can go, okay, so now I kind of know where to start my research process. I need to look into that a little bit more because it's not, totally sure if that's the right answer. So those are just a few of my favorite ways to use it. I guess, or I prompt it to get kind of the best answer to your questions, really.
Yeah, and I love that. I'll make sure to include those in the newsletter as well. But, we've all been there, like working a night shift. You have a patient with a rare disease and you're Googling, what is this
Yeah.
disease? Tell me everything. You want to absorb as much information. And it is so good at educating and breaking it all down and kind of like pulling from different sources. So I love that use for it.
Yeah, and honestly, like I think that's one of the bigger use cases, especially if you are a nurse in clinical, maybe like bedside nursing, and you do come across a really unique procedure, a medication or something. It can be your starting point for sure. Like, maybe your institution doesn't have a policy about that disease process yet. So you can really prompt it and ask it for some more information. And then I would really encourage nurses, as it's improving, the references were not great when they started to come out, but they're getting better. So really click those links, see what it pulls up. If it's a weird reference, maybe it hallucinated, and then you kind of know, okay, well, maybe I'll do my own, Google Scholar search of
Sure.
that actual thing. But try, because they are improving that feature every day, because people like to know where their information is coming from, especially nurses.
Absolutely. And you can be more specific, right? And say, I'd like information from scholarly articles or things like
Yes.
that. Yeah. So very cool. So, what is one message, if we kind of sum it all up, that you want nurses to walk away from this conversation with?
Yeah, I honestly would say AI is a tool. It's not a threat. It can really extend your capacity, not replace your expertise. So, our critical thinking, our empathy, our our clinical judgment, it really does remain irreplaceable. So experiment it, in a safe, low stakes way first, and then build your confidence with using it gradually. And the future of nursing, honestly, I think will be shaped by those who learn how to work with technology and not against it. So I guess that's my final kind of message and take home for everyone. But yeah, use it safely, use it responsibly, and just keep reading. Nursing researchers love this kind of stuff. So we're always trying to write articles or best practice things about these types of technologies, to kind of help nurses out there and know where to start using them or how to use them really safely.
Yeah, that's so great. Thank you so much for
Of
joining us
course.
today. You were able to break this down really nicely to something that feels like very overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, to something that really can make sense for nurses. So, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun, and I can't wait to watch more of the podcast in the future.
Thanks. And thanks everyone for listening today. So, the goal isn't to master AI overnight, but just to see it as a tool you can use just like any other skill and get better at along the way. So, thanks for listening. If you're not already signed up for the newsletter, head to the nontraditionalnurse.com to get stories, tips, and interviews like this delivered to your inbox. We'll see you next time.